Hello and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the To-Do List. I'm your host, Eric Fisher. This is the show where I talk to the people behind the productivity. This week, I'm excited to share with you a conversation I had with Jess Cording. She's the author of the new book, The Little Book of Game Changers, 50 Healthy Habits for Managing Stress and Anxiety. So you guessed it, we're talking exactly about those things, managing stress and anxiety. And we're going to talk about why you should make time to worry. I know, right? Sounds completely counterintuitive. We're going to talk about caffeine, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to have a plan for when you are lonely. And nobody seems to be talking about that. So I thought this is a really unique conversation to have, and I was really glad to do that with Jess. So I'm just going to get out of the way and say, enjoy this conversation with Jess Cording. Well, this week, it is my privilege to welcome to the show Jess Cording. Welcome to the show, Jess.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So health is probably one of the most important topics, and people don't often think of health as something that is involved with productivity. And obviously, since the show's called Beyond the To-Do List, we try to tackle productivity outside of the normal just, time management, or which planner are you using? And the other normal questions, you'd get on an average productivity podcast. We try to go beyond that. How do you see health tying into productivity?
Oh, it's all connected. When we feel well, we're able to work better. I'm actually really excited that more employers, more companies are embracing that, and that, there's more support for freelancers who need to, have the resources to take care of themselves so they can be more productive. I mean, I saw this so much in my work in corporate wellness, and I see it with my clients now all the time as well, that when you're not fueling yourself properly with the, foods that provide the nutrients that you need and in a balance that keeps you energized and satisfied, and, if you're not moving your body in a way that helps you feel like you're helping with your stress levels and you're, improving like blood flow, those are all things that are going to have an effect on how productive you're able to be at work and how well you'll be able to focus. And, not to mention the fact that if, you're not in good physical health, if your immune system's not in good working order, I mean, if you are taking a lot of sick days because you're sick and can't work, that's also going to affect your productivity.
That is one of the things that, I've tried to, for the bulk of time in the last, few years, really found is the thing that like knocks me out the most is like when I'm sick because I've not had any kind of, routine that is trying to get, I mean, we all get sick, even if we're, super on top of things, but it's how quickly you bounce back from it. Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I had a wake up call when I was, 28, 29, where, I was juggling 7 different income streams. And, I was working at the hospital. I was working in corporate wellness. I was writing. I was seeing private clients. I was doing all these different things. And, then I got hit with laryngitis really bad. And I could barely talk for it was about 4 weeks. But, after the first week, because I had all these different jobs that I was piecemealing together, I didn't have sick days. So it was the kind of thing, if I didn't work, I didn't get paid. And that was a really big wake up call to me. That was like, all right, we need to take a step back, figure out what's working, what's not working, because clearly something is not working. And, but I remember I was working in an ALS clinic at the time. And I remember trying to communicate with my patients when I had just this raspy voice and I was just writing things down and we were trying to communicate. And it was challenging, but a good learning experience.
Also, one of the cool things that for this time of year, for you to be coming out with this new book, the Little Book of Game Changers, 50 Healthy Habits for Managing Stress and Anxiety, I couldn't help but think, man, coming out, everybody comes out with their new book in January because everybody wants to change their whole life in January. But I like that you and I are recording this in February, where we're past that bubble of maybe unrealistic expectations and goal setting, and now we're into the more real time of year.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. February is when it gets real. Everybody's sort of come down off that new year, new you high, and they have this chance to either throw it all away or to take a peek at, okay, what's going well and what do I need to start over with, or, reassess their goals and get a sense of how they should proceed going forward. And what I see happen a lot in my work is people set really crazy ambitious goals at the beginning of the year. And I've been guilty of this too. But there is so much power in small changes and in taking small steps that you can build on. And that's one thing that I really, I'm glad that we're talking about this in February, because this is a time of year when, especially if you're feeling a little bit, down on yourself because maybe that lofty goal, you already feel off track with it. This is a great time to identify one or two small changes you can take and start to move forward.
Well, and I even got to ask, like, how would you suggest, if somebody's thinking in 2020, I want to change from how I was health-wise in 2019, but I almost feel like, again, with the new year, new you bubble that happens in, January, I think maybe that's a time where you say, okay, let me try out how doing this new, routine of, going to the gym or, what I do at the gym, changing that up, or, insert here the change, playing around, like actually trying it and experiencing, okay, what were the boundaries that I came up against as I tried to do that, so that then you can make a plan to how to overcome those, and not feel like it's a New Year's resolution where you started it in January and because you came up against resistance and then you were like, this is too hard, I quit. Instead, treat it as kind of an experiment phase so that you can actually come out the other end and tweak it and then do it.
I'm a big fan of using the word experiment. I feel like it takes the pressure off, and it also invites you to be curious. Whereas I've seen when we set these goals and we set lots of rules around these goals to help us, make progress towards them. For some people that can set them up to be in a more self-critical mindset. Whereas if we're experimenting with something, like, we can be more curious about what works and what doesn't work. For somebody who wants to, eat a more plant-based diet, that doesn't mean that you have to do like a green juice cleanse for an entire month.
Right.
You can start by just, maybe adding some extra vegetables to your plate and doing slightly smaller portions of meat if you want, or incorporating, one more vegetarian meal per week. It does not have to be, all or nothing. You can take tiny little steps and assess along the way.
Yeah, well, and I think this fits right in with how, you call yourself the no drama dietitian. A lot of people cause that drama by thinking they have to do an all or nothing change.
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes new clients, they're so shocked when I'm like, no, if chocolate's a non-negotiable, you can eat chocolate. We can make this work.
Wow. See, that's unheard of to me in terms of, somebody talking about health.
Yeah, well, that's what's really interesting. When we are able to really tune into what helps us feel like we're thriving and what our priorities are, that really helps us find a unique balance that works for our needs on our terms. And I think for some people, that's going to be different than others. We all have those things that are hard to be moderate with. We all have those things that we can take them or leave them. A lot of what I see people struggle with is trying to follow a plan that's, arbitrary, or it's not designed with them in mind. We go on social media and we see, this celebrity did this diet and got these results, but, we're all different. We all have different needs, different types of foods that make us feel great, different types of exercise that make us feel great. And we're also dealing with different things in our personal and professional lives that we have to take into account and make plans for.
Yeah, I love the individualized, approach, that there is no one size fits all or no, single silver bullet that's going to work for everybody. But, trying out these different things works great. It's why I really like that your book. It's a little book, but 50 healthy habits is like a lot of different healthy habits.
Well, you could look at it this way. You could even just implement one tiny thing, not even one every week. And over the course of the year, you'd have implemented 50 different healthy habits. Not that all of the habits in the book are necessarily the perfect fit for every single person,
Sure.
But you could take an approach like that.
I also like that you've broken up the book into 3 categories, I guess is the best way to put it, where you've got some of them that are under mind, some that are under body, and some that are under spirit. And again, as I was going through the book and even trying to figure out, pick some ones that seem interesting to you. But then I said, no, you know what? I'm going to go for the shocking ones, the ones that I don't think anybody's either thinking about or think are maybe contradictory in some way. So I'd love to throw one out from each of these categories to you so we can talk about each one of those.
Awesome.
So the first one is under the mind category, and it's called set aside daily worry time. And I'm like, wait a second. So we're supposed to set aside, the title of that section, it's like, wait, so are you saying we're supposed to set aside a time every day to actually worry? Because I thought we weren't supposed to worry.
Right. I mean, I grew up, under the mode of like, you should make everything look easy and just don't worry. Just move on. Just keep going. Like and I do talk about my mother in the book and growing up in an environment where my mother is one of the most wonderful people in the world, but I had some really non-traditional influences in terms of like, she's a psychotherapist, but she started doing hypnotherapy. So I grew up exposed to all different kinds of mind-body practices and meditation, and a lot of what's in the book, is things that have been on my radar since I was, I grew up around that stuff. But it used to drive me crazy as a teenager when she would say, just let it go. And,
right.
We don't have to let everything go. I think that we can learn a lot from what our worries might be telling us. And I do explain that in the book. There's a difference between, it's normal to have concerns. That's completely valid. But when worrying becomes intrusive and disrupts our daily functioning, that can be really hard to deal with. And I'm wired. I'm just wired to be an anxious person. It's just, I think why I'm so interested in all the research around this stuff, because, it came from a need to manage my own stress and anxiety as, over the years, and being able to help other people with that. But with the worry time, because it does have that power to be so disruptive, it doesn't mean that we have to turn off worry. Because again, like worry can alert us to things that might need to be on our radar and make sure that we take care of. Like, for example, if you have a family history of certain types of cancer that there are known lifestyle factors for, rather than just denying it, what you could do is, it's normal to worry like, okay, well, I don't want to get that form of cancer, and here's a couple things that I can do in my day-to-day life to help with that. But I'm getting a little bit off track. But the reason that setting aside time to worry can be so effective, and it does take practice, but when you feel that worry come up in your mind, rather than feeling like you have to unpack that whole thought right there and come up with a solution and, let it derail you, whatever you're trying to do in the moment, knowing that, you can take some time later in the day, whether you want to like write yourself a little note to come back to that thing, like a physical note, or just mentally note it, knowing that you have that space in your day to just let your mind go crazy with the worries and get it. I like to write down the things that are worrying me because that helps them get out of my head. It can be really helpful in freeing up brain power during the rest of your day.
Really, it's employing one of those deferring type skills that we talk about in productivity all the time, which is, I don't have time for this right now because it's not on the schedule, but I have time for it later. So, oh, okay. Well, then if you have time for it later, I won't bug you about it now. Your mind then says.
Exactly. And it takes a while it takes practice,
Yeah.
Like it's not like overnight you're going to master this, but it can be so, so powerful. Just quieting those thoughts and, you can deal with them later.
Yeah. It's having that time block already set in place to basically check in on yourself and say, okay, now what was it that I was worrying about earlier today that I wrote down and said, I'll talk to myself about that, or, self-assess on that when the time is right later today, or if it's, or my next worry time is tomorrow, then tomorrow.
Exactly.
So it's really cool how, again, making a time for, setting aside a daily worry time seems like it's like, wait, why would I do that? But then once you start to dig into it, it's like, oh, this is genius. This is something, that we could all stand to use for a little bit more self-awareness and freeing up our mental energy.
Yeah, it's real. That freedom is gold. Like that's really what a lot of the stuff that I focus on in my writing and with my clients. It's really about helping people feel a sense of freedom and ease.
let's move on to body. And with this one, I kind of went for the one that I think everybody deals with, which is finding your sweet spot with caffeine. Everybody, they either love coffee or they've got their other drug of choice for receiving their caffeine intake, if they use it at all. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, caffeine it's fascinating because it's, a lot of us, it functions not just as a source of, that pick me up, that physical caffeine boost. It's also, in many ways, it can be a social connector. It's almost like how a cigarette break used to be like the way to get a break. And now that the coffee break is a way that's like a socially acceptable way to be like, oh, like I'm just going to go get a coffee, take a coffee break, or, you meet people for coffee. And it's interesting in our food culture right now, coffee, there's a lot of confusion around it. And there are some camps that say coffee is terrible, like all of it, like it's going to jack your cortisol and mess with your energy and your mood. And then there's people who are like, no, coffee is a superfood. And, I think that the exact answer of how coffee, like what space it occupies in your life, really depends on the individual. There are some people that, can physically handle a lot more caffeine than others. There are some people that even a tiny bit is going to mess with their sleep and make them really anxious. And I do talk a little bit about this in the book where, there's obviously several different types of caffeine. Coffee and tea and soda are some of the main ones. Chocolate is a teeny tiny bit of caffeine in there. And of course, then you have all your different energy drinks, and more we're seeing, energy or like natural health drinks with things like plant-derived caffeine. And I always think it's funny when they say plant-derived caffeine, because where else would they be getting it from? But
right. Coffee beans are still grown on plants. So
yeah. So I don't know. There's, there are certain products where they'll be marketed as like a healthy, natural energy boost. And then you see like in fine print, includes 85 milligrams of plant-based caffeine. And that can be fine. I think that, so current recommendations around caffeine, for most healthy adults, quote unquote, that's used as the kind of benchmark, is recommended capping it at about 400 milligrams per day. So that's equivalent to about 4 cups of, drip coffee. Mm-hmm. But that said, a lot of, coffee companies do brew a stronger cup now. So if you go to Starbucks, you're looking at I think it's like 180 milligrams in a grande drip coffee. But, espresso, that's about 75 milligrams per shot of espresso. Just as a heads up too, like for pregnant women, the recommendation is about 200 milligrams max per day. And in the book, I share my experience of, when I was in my late 20s and like around age 30, at that time I was drinking like 8 cups of coffee a day, which is not good for anybody. Even if you don't have any pre-existing medical conditions or health concerns, it's just too much coffee. And I was dealing with heart palpitations and sleep disruption. Of course, I was in denial. I was like, oh, it's stress. It's work stress. I'm stressed. And I go to the doctor and she says, how much coffee are you drinking? And it was like busted. And but I will say this coffee, we get addicted to it, or caffeine in general. Yeah. It's a physical and also an emotional or behavioral addiction. And, your sweet spot is going to be different from, your best friend's sweet spot with caffeine. But I remember for myself, the goal was to get to that 400 milligrams. That was like my starting goal, even though my longer term goal was to get it closer to 200 or 100 milligrams a day. So, you can do a cold turkey approach when dialing down the caffeine, but if another approach that I offer in the book is to, start with small swaps, like switching your order from a large to a medium, or from a medium to a small, or starting with, half decaf, swapping out, if you normally would have another cup of coffee in the afternoon, see how it feels to swap it out for an herbal tea, because, and I think I mentioned earlier about how we treat coffee as a social connector. Explore where that coffee or that caffeine source, where that fits in your life? Like, why is it about the caffeine, or is it more just you've become addicted to the caffeine because you've conditioned yourself to take that coffee break? And you can still take that break. Just swap out something that's not going to contribute more caffeine than you need. And you also want to make sure that, because when you're dealing with caffeine withdrawal, you're going to feel symptoms. Like, I'm not going to lie. It is not always the most fun. You might experience headaches. You might experience some irritability, some feeling foggy and tired, but it does go away. It does get better. And sometimes knowing that that's temporary can be a really great comfort. But I have seen that people sometimes struggle with, like, aside from the low energy and feeling cranky, I've also seen people struggle with food cravings, usually for sugar or very high energy foods. So planning ahead for that and making sure that your meals are providing a good balance of protein, fat, and fiber to keep you full, that's going to make a really big difference. Also, staying hydrated, that's also going to help you feel more alert, energized. And for the food that you're eating, it's also going to help, fiber that you're eating. It's going to help it to do its job and keeping you full. If you don't want to talk about biochemistry, I won't get into the nitty gritty gross stuff of like how that works, but making sure that your diet's on point and helping you feel energized and that you're hydrating adequately. Those are two things that'll help. And exercise can also really help if you're dealing with that irritability and that low energy. And this other one is, I know it's not always realistic for us all the time, depending on what your work schedule is like. But whatever version of it works for you, planning around your natural energy ebbs and flows, and when, if you are going to be continuing to have some caffeine, maybe being strategic about what times of day you're having it, or if you do have the capability of planning out which projects or which activities you're going to be doing at different points in your day, keeping in mind when you might have the most or the least energy during that time.
I love that. And again, one of the other things that I've found is, and it's so individualistic, because I know there's people who have almost zero tolerance for caffeine at all. I have a pretty low tolerance, so it doesn't, I can't have more than, say, 2 cups in the day, or I start to feel like, again, the heart palpitations or, headaches from having too much coffee. Caffeine is tied so much to productivity. We think, oh, well, if I want to be productive, I got to wake up. I got to have energy. So I'm going to go to coffee. That's my thing. But, like you were saying, questioning the cue and reward, and the routines even around why we are drinking that coffee and when we're drinking it, and, replacing it. I've done the cold turkey. It's not fun. If I was going to do that again, which in fact I know that I've been, having more recently than I probably should, caffeine wise, but, and I've been wondering why I've been stressed. So I think there's a cue there for sure. Excuse me. But I think that, I would definitely go with more of a tapering down, instead of an altogether just cutting it out. And again, I love that you're adding in, the fiber, the fat, the protein, and other things that give you energy to kind of counteract what's going to feel like a drag or a drop in my energy levels from cutting out that, substance, caffeine. Yeah.
I'm not a fan of at least in my own life and with my clients, I've just found that the cold turkey for a lot of people is just, a lot of people are likely to give up or lose faith in themselves. Yeah. And white knuckling it, I'm just not a fan of the white knuckled approach. Like, life is hard enough. If there are ways that we can make it more easeful, like, let's go for it.
Yeah. There's another no drama right there. Yeah. Cause in my experience, the cold turkey with getting off caffeine is like, well, welcome to 1 week of migraines almost, depending upon how you do it. So
been there, done that.
Yeah. Okay. So that is, what I wanted to touch on. And again, it's almost a productivity topic in and of itself with caffeine. I wanted to then move from body over to spirit. And this is one, again, we don't talk a lot when it comes to productivity in and of itself, but it's very tied into productivity. It's having a loneliness game plan. And I bring that up because I work from home, And my only person here, I know you've got cats. I've got a dog. I think he's in the room. I can't tell. His bed's over around the corner. He comes in and lays down when I'm busy, but he may have left the room. But anyway, that helps with loneliness. But, for a lot of us, even if we're in a crowd or even if we're working at coffee shops, like we've got loneliness, happening. And, again, we don't really, it's one of those things where it kind of sneaks up on you. In my experience, you don't know that it's happening. It starts to happen and you wonder, why do I feel so off today? It's because I haven't had personal interaction with any human. It's kind of like when someone who's a parent and is home taking care of a child all day. And then suddenly it was like, oh, you're here. I can have adult conversation now. That.
Exactly. And loneliness is it's a major public health issue. And it's interesting to me because we're so aware of this as a culture, but I don't feel like we've figured out what to do about it yet. And I you often see advertisements for like dating apps and networking groups. And, I think that we're starting to see more emphasis on finding ways to help people connect offline as well. But, it's still, and I think there's also this idea that only single people get lonely or, only people who live and work alone get lonely. But like you said, like we can be in a crowd and feel lonely. Like we can, I know even in my own life, my partner can be like 2 feet away from me. But if I'm connected to a feeling that makes me feel lonely or is making me very aware of a loss or a lack, that can still happen. And, I think that one thing I've seen in my work so much is that, loneliness is one of those feelings that we feel so much dis-ease around it, and we're not very well conditioned to deal with it. And so what happens very often is that we slip into unhealthy coping mechanisms when we feel lonely because we haven't really learned how to deal with feeling lonely in a healthy way. And I write about this in the book where in a few different places where, we all have our different versions of those unhealthy coping mechanisms. It's not always about food. I joke about in mine, like shopping has been a thing in the past. And, like the $12.99 sports bras from Old Navy that I'm putting in my online shopping cart, like it's kind of the emotional equivalent to a bag of M&Ms from the vending machine, and, only difference is that's returnable, I guess. But with loneliness, I've seen it really derail a lot of people's efforts to stay on track towards a healthy living goal. So it started as an experiment, going back to the experiment phase. And, in my own life, I had a summer where it was my first summer living away from home, and I had a job and an internship, and I was taking night classes, and I was interacting with a fair number of people on a day-to-day basis, but I was away from my, what was familiar, and I hadn't put down roots yet, and I felt really lonely. And I literally just wrote down a list one day of things that I could do when I was lonely. And I found it so helpful. And, when I moved to New York a few years after that and, going through different phases of life where, you're maybe relearning a new landscape, a new situation, or just a new emotional landscape even, that technique I found very helpful. And I started using it as an experiment with some clients who were really struggling with loneliness. And I remembered how useful that technique had been. I said, well, hey, let's give this a try. Why don't you just write down 3 or 4 things that you enjoy doing, that when you start to feel lonely, that maybe instead of eating all the snack food that's in your apartment, what if you try doing one of these activities instead and see if that works? And it was so successful that I've made it a regular part of my practice. And there's no rule about what you're supposed to do. I do share this in the book that I love cleaning when I feel lonely. It's just for some reason, because I think for myself, one of the emotions that really rocks me to my core is not being able to solve a problem for someone or not being able to understand something. And so there's something very soothing to my nervous system about cleaning and bringing order to a drawer or whatever. But it doesn't mean that cleaning is going to be the right fit for everybody, and I think that when you're making this list for your loneliness game plan of the things that you can do, make sure that they're things you actually enjoy doing that are actually going to feel restorative. So, not things that you think like, oh, that sounds healthy, I should do that, or that sounds productive, I should do that. Because what happens is when we don't when we don't address our loneliness, when we try to shove it under the rug and push through it, or if we do fall back onto an unhealthy coping mechanism, that can really cause our productivity to take a hit because our mind is otherwise occupied and it's hard to focus on what we need to be focusing on.
Yeah. And it's a very, almost elusive or lingering feeling that's hard to nail down. It made me think of, have you ever heard of HALT, HALT, which is an acronym for hungry, angry, lonely, which ties in here, or tired?
I love that.
So this is one of them. I mean, loneliness is one of them. And, it's one of those things where it's like a self-awareness kind of go-to of, wait, I feel so down right now. Like, what's going on? I'm off. Oh, well, wait, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? All those things that kind of, oh, I forgot to eat lunch, or man, I've been dwelling on how angry I am. This is the third one, lonely, and obviously tired. And, and honestly, hungry and tired and I guess angry and even all four of these really tie into all different parts of your book in different ways. So.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully you're not going to feel all four of those things at once.
No.
But, if you do, start with the one that you can, that feels most urgent to address and start there.
Yeah. And this is something that, again, I have a friend who's like, yeah, once in a while I am off and I treat people like crap. And then I realize, oh crap, I am tired, or I am hungry, or I've been lonely. And so then he's able to course correct. But it's one of those things where it's like, again, this is almost one of those things where it folds back into the setting aside the worried time. Like if you're checking in with yourself once a day to see what you're worrying about, this is where some of those symptoms, maybe not hungry, because you probably can't go you shouldn't probably go 24 hours without eating something, but yeah. But the tired or lonely, a consistency of tiredness or loneliness or even angriness is going to probably rear its head in some thoughts and feelings in that worry time, right?
Absolutely. And taking a moment to just be mindful of what is going well and showing yourself, because we do tend to focus on the negative. And I think that sometimes when you are doing that check-in, it's also a great time to, note the stuff that you're worrying, but then take a sec to acknowledge what's going well. And, maybe jot down a couple things that you feel good about. And sometimes infusing that little bit of positivity into the equation can help you reset your energy for the day, or help you, as you're looking back on the day, maybe help you drift off to sleep a little more easily.
Yeah. Well, and so to go back to specifically loneliness, we're all different. We're all, even extroverts experience loneliness. I'm an introvert, but I can pretend I'm not sometimes, but, it all comes down to what uniquely you need to be doing in order to make sure you're taking care of yourself, not just with loneliness, but with all the aspects of health. And that's why I really love, this book. And I mean, again, this is not a, life hack type book. It's not, even though it's called, the Little Book of Game Changers, 50 Healthy Habits for Managing Stress and Anxiety. In no way is this some kind of shortcut thing. In fact, this is almost 50 experiments to try.
Yeah. And I do, there is this also element, like these are really simple, actionable tools, but you also have to want to do the work and to show up and be curious and explore and experiment. No one can do that for you. But, my hope is that people will find these tools really approachable and want to experiment with them.
Yeah, for sure. So I was excited to see, again, that I picked out specific topics that I thought really tie in with productivity in and of itself, or were surprising to like, wait, what do you mean? That's a thing, or the opposite of a thing. Like, wait, I didn't know that we were supposed to set aside time to worry, but, I really think this is a great book, and I'd love for people to, go check it out. Is there any specific place you want to drive people to?
The best place to find me, my website is jessicacordingnutrition.com, but I'm also on Instagram and Twitter at Jess Cording. And I also on Facebook can be found at Jessica Cording Nutrition. So please feel free to connect with me on there. Awesome. The book is available on Amazon.
Awesome. And I'll link up to all those places in the show notes for this episode. And Jess, just thank you so much. This has been a great time talking with you. And I've gotten a lot out of the book, and I know everybody else is going to also.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's another podcast. Cross off your podcast listening to-do list. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Jess Cording. I know I did. I was glad to pick out those kind of outlier kind of pieces from her book, but there's so much more in there. So make sure to go grab the book. You can find out more at jessicacordingnutrition.com, or just go to the link in the show notes for this episode at beyondthetodolist.com/311. And if you found this conversation helpful, I'd love for you to do me the favor of sharing it with somebody you know needs to hear it. Just hit the share button on whatever podcast player app of choice you're using right now. And thanks for sharing. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next episode.